Hi folks, so I recently tested out the 180 to 600mm f6.3 zoom against the 600 PF, and I have to say I was really impressed with the prime's performance. We all know they often do better, but the 180 to 600 is so good. So I was surprised to see this was that much better, and it really does justify the $3,000 price difference. But with the PF being so good, how then do you justify the 600 f4? Yes, it's got a built-in TC, it's got rear filters, it's an f4, so 1 1/3 stops faster than the 6.3, but it's like another $12,000 more than this one. Epic money. So we're going to compare them and see how they do. And just for fun, I'm going to mix in the 400-2.8. It also has a built-in TC that'll let you get up to 560 at f4, so in the same kind of ballpark. We're going to shoot some sports and some birds, and I'll give you sample files you can download to see how these three compare. I mean, it probably goes without saying that this is a lot more difficult to handhold than this, and of course it's going to depend on your technique and your strength and all of that kind of thing, but I think the 600 6.3 PF is really handholdable for most adults for a whole day of shooting. Even with the big body, it's just comfortable and it's the right weight that you can easily do it. And that actually kind of helps counteract the fact that you have a slower aperture, because you're not going to need as much stabilization. You're able to shoot at a slightly slower shutter speed because you're not going to have that tremor from the shuttering under the weight. The big guy, the stabilization is great, but it's really at that level where I can shoot with it for 15 minutes here and there. But if I were doing a whole event, I would absolutely want to be using a monopod with it. So apart from the image quality results we're going to see later, the way you're going to shoot with them for a full job is going to really vary. And of course, if you're traveling, how you pack these is going to be really different as well. You can check out these three lenses at B&H Photo below. By using Paybu, their exclusive store card, you can instantly get credited back the state sales tax, which on these lenses is significant. On the 600 PF, that can save you up to $455, and the 600 f4, that's over $1,400 saved. It's available exclusively at B&H Photo, details are below. So I'm actually finding the 600 too long here often, let alone engaging the TC. But of course, blaming a lens for being too long is like blaming a screwdriver for being too large. You're just using the wrong one for the job. When we're shooting the birds, the more reach I could have, the better. I would take 800 happily. But here on the sidelines, 400 is great. 560 once they're a bit further away or once you're in portrait orientation, but they need to be about half the pitch away to be able to really make use of the 600 or the 600 with TC. And then there's no one behind me. Imagine action. Okay.
If you're in the Nikon Z system, folks, check out my expert setup guide. It takes you through the Z9, the Z8, ZF, and every other camera in the system, showing you how to initially set them up out of the box, how to customize them for your use case, and loads of tips and tricks on how to get the most out of them for your specific style of shooting. Full details below.
Yeah. So shooting the hockey was great. I had all three lenses to go with. I have to say, as I mentioned, you have to pick your focal length for whatever sport it is you're doing. For shooting from one end to the other, the 600s were doing great. From the sideline, the 400 was a more appropriate option here. Next up, I'm going to take just the two 600s and shoot some birds at the local market here and see how they do with those smaller subjects.
I was shooting both of the Z9s that day using firmware version 4.1. That's also covered in the Nikon setup guide that you can check out below. I seem to be at this bird street every week lately. It kind of helps that it's right near the Nikon showroom. Now, all of these are spectacular lenses. Anyone who gets the chance to shoot with these should count themselves really lucky. I think the 600 f6.3 PF lens is going to suit the most people, but stay tuned to the conclusion and I'll talk you through the use cases for the big boys.
Now, I don't want to keep repeating myself about the focal length. You really need to choose the one that's going to work for your sport. I've found here the 400 versatility up to 560 is the best, but just comparing the two 600, I can't overestimate or overstate the difference in handling between these two. I found overall the focus acquisition and tracking seems to be doing just as well on both of them. Nikon users would know the autofocus still isn't perfect on these guys, and if it doesn't see your subject because it's blurred out in the foreground, often it just won't find them without you doing a manual focus override. And again, that was less likely to occur with the 400. So I don't know, maybe it's just that the longer the lens, the more likely the focus gets stuck in the distance and has trouble in the foreground. But overall, they're all spectacular to shoot with. It's really going to come down to the image quality, and then if you can justify that $12,000 price difference between these based on the file. So let's go take a look.
Okay folks, so back in studio now. As I kind of alluded to during the video, the top line conclusion is you should pick the tool that works for the job that you're doing. Now I know that's not really satisfying for people. Everyone loves a X is best, Y is worst kind of answer. So I'll do my best. I think the image quality of the 400 2.8 is the best, followed closely behind by the 600 f4 and then the 600 f6.3. But then the usability is the PF, then the 400, then the 600. In terms of application, it really is going to come down to what you're shooting, how you're shooting, where you're shooting from, and the kind of crops that you want. It's kind of goes without saying, if you're considering a $15,000 lens, I hope you already know this, but there's lots of different ways to shoot soccer or hockey or whatever it is that you shoot. If you're shooting from the media scrum or from the bleachers or from the sideline, it's going to greatly impact what focal length you need to be using to get the kind of shots that you want. I would say really broadly, the 400 is quite versatile for sports, especially with the TC, from more close-up things to further away. The 600 f6.3 is a great option, but if you're shooting indoors, do think about what that aperture is going to mean. Yes, it's only 1.3 stops difference between these two guys, which seems on one hand very small, but just think that's the difference if you're keeping your shutter speed the same of ISO 800 versus 1800 or 8000 versus 18,000. If you're shooting indoors, that can have a huge impact on your final image quality and the flexibility that you have in terms of your shutter speed as well. For a lot of the sports and birds and stuff, you're going to be at really high shutter speed, so it does end up putting you at high ISOs and, it's going to more than double if you're using the f6.3. 600 for, I think, is kind of the ideal safari lens. That's the kind of distance you're often away from animals. For birds, I would go with an 800. I'm going back to the southern area of Bhutan at the end of the year, to Bengal region, and I will take the 400, but I'm also going to take along the 800 PF for birds and wildlife. You just can't get close enough when you're dealing with birds. So that's kind of the top line takeaway. Keep in mind that these two guys have drop-in filter threads. This one is a front 95mm filter thread. So, you know, on balance, this is going to suit, if we're just looking at these three, 90% of customers, and then 5%. If nothing else, the budget is, the cost is going to put it out of most people's budget. But if we added back in the 180 to 600, that probably appeals to even more people, being a third of the price of this one and giving you the flexibility of a zoom. So think through what you're shooting, what kind of focal length works best for you. Check out the sample files. They're over at learn.mattgranger.com, and whilst you're there, you can check out my expert setup guide. And please do let me know what other long lens comparisons you would like to see done. I'm in a very fortunate position where I'm able to get access to these lenses to test out, so I'll be happy to do more for you guys in the future. Thanks, I'll see you soon.